On Wings of Song by Thomas M. Disch. So this is the 53rd book I've read in this series that I'm doing called The Masterpieces of Science Fiction. This is also the first book I've read from Thomas M. Disch, and this was originally serialized in 3 parts in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And then in 1979 it was put together as in a novel. And I have here the first US paperback version of this book that came out in 1980 from Bantam Books. Now, this book was nominated for all sorts of awards when it came out, but the only one it won was the John W. Campbell Award for Best Novel. And if you know anything about John W. Campbell and the golden age of science fiction, and Thomas M. Disch being from the American new wave of science fiction, I'm sure Campbell rolled over in his grave when this book won the award. But anyways, let's just try to get into this one. This is a very different book. It's a hard book to talk about. It has some loose science fiction elements. I would say mostly this is just a book of literature. And I think if you know some facts about Thomas M. Disch's life, this book seems to go over a lot of his own personal themes. And he was a cynic. He had kind of a dark outlook on a lot of things. This book will take you to some very dark places, but it's also very beautiful in many ways too. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So first off, I'll just talk about this. One of the main science fiction elements that's in this book is this dystopian United States that Disch envisions in this book. So most of this book takes place in the United States, mostly in Iowa and New York City. There's also a bit of this book that kind of takes place in the Twin Cities, which is in Minnesota. The Twin Cities are Minneapolis and St. Paul. But the United States is kind of fractured into these very distinct areas. And Iowa being a farming area, it's very religious, very conservative. And you have places like New York and these bigger cities like the Twin Cities that are way more liberal. And there's this real scarcity of resources, not only, fuel and that kind of thing, but food. And so it's a very bleak kind of looking world. People are making it, but they're by no means thriving in the United States. There's periods where resources are really tightened down to where people are hungry and cold. And that's kind of the setting that Disch paints in this book. Now there's this also there's this concept of flying, which is what we have here on this slightly cheesy cover. And the title of the book, On Wings of Song, is the central kind of idea and theme of this book. And in the beginning of the book, they're talking about flying. You're not exactly sure what it is, but in this fictional novel, it's a way for someone to actually transcend in a way. They use song as a means, and they're hooked up to these machines. And not everyone can do this, and if you sing just right, you can actually kind of leave your body. You almost turn into this fairy that can travel all around the planet. And this is also kind of helped in this separation between these conservative and liberal areas. So in Iowa, flying is completely banned, and even singing certain songs and distributing certain types of information about flying is completely outlawed, and it's a felony. And then there's places like New York City where they have clinics where you can go in and hook yourself up to this machine and sing and try to transcend. But it's a very difficult thing. Not everyone does it. And a lot of people some people are trying to do this. And so the book, it takes place mostly in Iowa and New York, like I said. And it's all around our central character here, Daniel, who's shown on the cover. It's a kind of a coming of age of Daniel's life from a young boy all the way through manhood. And when he was young, his mom left his family in Iowa to go to New York because she wanted to fly. And she ends up coming back later in life. And so he's kind of from this split family in a way. And he's always curious about flying. You don't know if he's really wanting to do this or if he's just curious about it. But towards the beginning of the novel, him and one of his best friends, they tell their parents they're going to go camping, and they sneak across the border and go to the Twin Cities because there's going to be this big political rally. And a bunch of weird things happen, some circumstances happen, and what ends up happening is his buddy ends up just taking off and leaving him in the lurch. He doesn't know where he went. He's not really explaining anything, and Daniel has to come back home without his friend. And his friend's dad suspects Daniel had something to do with this. He starts investigating Daniel, and he finds out he's distributing some information he's not supposed to. And so he has him arrested and prosecuted. It's a felony. And at the age of 14, Daniel's sent to this prison. Now, this prison setting is very unique that Disch envisions. These prisoners are forced to eat this lozenge that just stays inside their stomach. And these prisons don't really have guards or walls. There's a warden that's kind of overseeing some things, but pretty much the prisoners are all left to themselves to sort out this prison society on their own. And there's this central radio transmitter that kind of creates this invisible barrier, this dome. And if one of the prisoners leaves that range, then this lozenge will explode in their stomach and kill them. And they're barely given enough to eat. They have to do all these different things to try to get these vouchers, which will basically give them a Big Mac from McDonald's. And it's almost required to survive because they're given really not enough food to survive. And occasionally these prisoners will basically commit suicide by walking past this invisible boundary and letting this lozenge explode in their stomach. It's a very cynical, dystopian picture that Disch is painting in this. And another good example of this, I think, is when Daniel's in this prison, one of his teachers sends him a book, and he's not even sure he's going to get it, but the warden rips a couple pages out that they didn't think was worthy and ends up giving the book to Daniel. And the book is called The Product is God by Jack Van Dyke. And the cover of the book shows Jesus crowned with thorns holding a hamburger. Drops of blood from Jesus and drops of ketchup from the burger mingle in a crimson pool, which the words of the title rose up from lime green islands. So he's using this book and really criticizing a lot of different things that have to do with religion and capitalism, and I mean, you name it. He goes over so many different themes in this book. It's the book from there kind of just continues to follow Daniel's life, his curiosity of flying, what flying really means. He travels to New York to try to explore these ideas. He meets people. He goes through all sorts of ranges of emotions, just like Disch takes you, the reader, on. You will be disgusted. You will be sad. There's cynicism, of course. There's beautiful parts of this book. There's parts that are heartbreaking. Disch will build you up just to kind of slam you down into the mud. It goes all over the place. And the one thing I would say is just maybe make sure you're in the right frame of mind when you read this book. I'm okay reading this kind of thing, but it really does go into some dark places. There's some really dark humor in this book. There's a scene where a family sits down and eats a half-cooked turkey. I mean, it goes all over the place. Overall, I really enjoyed this book, but like I said, it's not for everyone. While there's these things happening, most of the book is inside these characters' heads in a form of like stream of conscience, or just spending time with their internal monologue and what they're thinking and going through. So this book took me a really long time to read. Every once in a while, I like to kind of just time myself. And at some points in this book, I timed myself, and I was reading 20 pages an hour, which is really low for me. But it was just very dense, and I really didn't want to miss anything. I really enjoyed the process of reading it. But in the end, there's some really dark things that I don't know about the ending. I don't want to go into too much about that, but I'll just put it this way. This book is probably going to stick around with me for a while. So that's where we're at on that one. If any of that sounds interesting and you want to give that one a go, read it. If not, I wouldn't blame you. And if you have read it, let me know if I'm way off base or if any of that kind of resonated with you as well. But next up, I'm reading the Hopkins manuscript by R.C. Sheriff. So just look for that one coming out next. And once again, thanks for watching.